Welcome to our latest weekly edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. I'm Jonathan Hudson, and in today's edition, we'll focus on the northern front of Israel, Lebanon, the unfortunate, deadly attack on Majd al-Shams, which the heinous Iranian proxy Hezbollah launched as part of barrages of rockets throughout northern Israel, and much more. To do just that, let's now turn to my colleague in Washington, D.C., Mr. Mike Duran, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute and the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East, formerly a senior director at the National Security Council in Washington for the Middle East and North Africa. Mr. Duran, it's great seeing you.
Great being here.
I'd like to immediately ask you to give us a broad understanding on the latest developments. What should we take into account for today's discussion, and what should we also keep in mind, considering the fact that the Biden administration, on the one hand, emphasizes Israel's right to self-defense, but on the other hand, continues to maintain those constraints on Israel to launch a full-fledged attack against the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, namely Hezbollah?
Well, I think you just put your finger on the crux of the problem when viewed from Jerusalem, and that's that the Americans pay lip service to Israel's self-defense, but the real policy of the Biden administration is to shut down the war. They want to shut down the war in Gaza, and they think that that will lead to a ceasefire in Lebanon. So their biggest concern at the moment is actually to constrain the Israeli response to the outrage, this attack that killed all of these children in Majd al-Shams. The Israeli dilemma starts with the fact that they are restricted by the Americans, who reportedly will not allow them to attack in Beirut. They can't hit the headquarters of Hezbollah. They don't want Israel to take out critical national infrastructure of Lebanon. They want it to be proportional, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the Israelis have another problem, which is the nature of the Hezbollah threat. Hezbollah has these Iranian drones, missiles, and ballistic missiles, as well as anti-tank guided missiles, and so on, which are very, very difficult for Israel to suppress. In order for Israel to end the fire from Lebanon, it would probably have to occupy all of southern Lebanon, maybe even more. Ultimately, also, it probably would have to go to war with Iran, because an all-out war with Hezbollah to suppress the fire from Lebanon would probably draw in the Iranians, as well as the Iranians' militias from Iraq and Syria. Israel can't engage in such a conflict without the United States. It needs the United States to deter the Iranians, to hold the ring around Lebanon, so that Israel can take care of Hezbollah without outside intervention of Iran and others. And the Biden administration is simply not going to give Israel that support. So the Israelis are in a real dilemma. They cannot take this sitting down. They have to respond very forcefully, but not so forcefully that they're going to harm their relations with Washington at a time when things are so delicate in Gaza. So it's a real conundrum. I'm expecting to see a very significant response from the Israelis, one that will send a very strong message to Hezbollah, and maybe one that will actually send a strong message to the Americans as well. Maybe the Israelis will go past some of the red lines that the Americans have sent. Because, look, they were already restrained, Jonathan, in the April 13-14. The Americans, Biden restrained them in their response to the Iranians then. The Biden administration is sending a message to Israel's adversaries that the adversaries, can count on the United States to hold Israel in a bear hug while the adversaries punch it. That's unacceptable to the Israelis. They have to send a message that they will not accept this. But getting that right, walking that line between keeping American support and demonstrating strength to the adversaries is no easy task.
Thank you, Mr. Duran. I think it's important, for context's sake, to relate to our viewers. On Saturday night, roughly at 30 minutes after 6 p.m., one of a barrage of 50 rockets, 40 rockets roughly, was launched in the direction of the Golan Heights. This one struck a soccer field or a football field, depends where you're watching from, killing, unfortunately and regrettably, 12 little children between the ages of 10 to 20. Those children were rushing. They have 15 seconds to run into a specific makeshift bomb shelter not far from that soccer field, and they were running in that direction. Unfortunately, between the soccer field and the bomb shelter or the small makeshift shelter, the rocket struck a warhead of 53 kilograms, according to IDF Chief of General Staff Lieutenant General Herzia Levy, something that didn't give them a chance. 29 other children sustained separate degrees of injuries, including 6 in critical condition. This is really an excruciating moment, not only for the families of those that were hurt, but the entire Druze community, as those children were members of that community in Israel, and for the entire state of Israel. I mean, whoever understands and has some sense of compassion, children playing soccer on a Saturday eve during the summer holiday is something that should not face any such kind of attack. But those attacks have been taking place daily since October 8th of 2023, and thousands, tens of thousands of children have been forcibly relocated to other locations throughout of Israel, something that we also have to highlight. Now let's turn to another colleague of ours, Mr. Marshall Billingsley, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, who formerly served as Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for combating terrorist finance, as well as the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, among other positions that he held over the years. It's good to see you, Marshall. I'd like to get 2 cents of your perspective on this. I'm sure that much of which Mike mentioned, or all of what Mike mentioned, at least from my perspective, I didn't disagree with anything he said. So it makes your life a lot easier.
Well, first of all, my heart goes out to the Druze community. I had an opportunity to visit with the Sheikh and you actually when I was in Israel back in February, and this is a horrific loss. This should never happen to children. And that was an Iranian-supplied missile, by the way. Jonathan, the quote that comes to mind that I think is most relevant to this situation is from George Patton, who said that a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. It's essential that Netanyahu and the government respond and retaliate in a very, very forceful way now. The longer they wait, the more the pressure on them, the more the efforts by the Biden administration to establish handcuffs will grow. It's essential that they move quickly. And I personally believe that at this stage, Nasrallah himself should fear for his life.
Thank you, Marshall. I completely agree. It goes back to the various deliberations that were at the time about whether or not to start a 2-front war. Everybody were highlighting, specifically with regard to the Islamist Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in the north. In Lebanon, everybody were quoting the Romans or the Roman ancient philosophy as saying that never start 2 fronts at the same time. Well, the Romans were also the ones that highlighted time and again, never wait for the right timing to slip out of your fingers and take the initiative when it presents itself. Let's now turn to northern Israel, where we're joined by Major General in Reserve Gilshon Cohen, formerly the commander of the Israeli military defense colleges, as well as the Northern Corps, as well as the Chief of General Staff Corps, commander of both the corps. And I'd like to immediately ask you, General, to give us a IDF perspective, an Israeli perspective to what is the current modus operandi, what's the current tactical and strategic state of play, and what should we focus on in relaying to the international community as well as to leaders watching right now?
Actually, my standpoint now is that we are in a dramatic era in which all the considerations are not at all relevant in considering the fact, as just mentioned now, that we must react immediately and with a kind of a high impression. Other way, we will lose an image not only of what Israel capabilities are to defend itself, but also to take severe decision making. It means that we are like absolutely being prevented from taking decisions. And we must emphasize again and again, even to our members in Washington, that speaking about self-defense, we must mention that a real self-defense demanded sometimes offensive actions and means, and it demanded to be effective by speaking about the necessity of shock and awe, even in defensive operations. Shock and awe is not just belonging to offensive operations. It is harder to achieve that in such circumstances, very complicated circumstances, but it must create a kind of a feeling that it is a absolutely surprising, unprecedented, and with the effect of shock and awe. Here we need an effect. It will not really bring a peace, it will not bring victory, but that effect is necessary.
Mr. Duran, Secretary Blinken, I'm going back to his visit in Tokyo, during the course of which he said the following: we're in conversations with the government of Israel, and again, I emphasize its right to self-defense and defend its citizens and our determination to make sure that they're able to do that. But we also don't want to see the conflict escalate. We don't want to see it spread. That has been one of our goals from day one, from October 7th on. What is your response to Secretary Blinken?
Well, I would ask how successful that policy has been from October 7th on, because what has happened is that America's ally, Israel, is actually not in control of its own sovereign territory, because they've had to evacuate the north. The administration talks about this conflict like it's a conflict for Gaza. They talk about this conflict both in terms of what's happening day to day and in terms of their vision of the day after, like it's a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But this is not what it is. It is objectively an Iranian-Israeli conflict, and Iran is using all of its proxies against Israel. But I actually think it's, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said in Washington last week, I believe he's correct. It's actually an Iranian-American conflict. The Iranians are trying to drive a wedge between Israel and the United States, and the American policy of restricting its ally while calling on the Iranians to have a moderating influence is actually just weakening their ally. The Iranians are not having a moderating influence. The Iranians may have moderated, if I can use that word, with respect to Iraqi and Syrian militias carrying out attacks against Americans, but they have escalated against Israel with the Houthis, with Hezbollah, and with others. So the effect, the net effect of the American policy is to tie the hands of America's ally, which is on the front lines fighting for the American security system in the Middle East, and giving advantage to the enemy. And we need to explain this to the American people, and demand that the American government actually shift its policy. If the U.S. were to come in behind Israel, and it were actually to put the fear of God in Tehran, then there might actually be a moderating influence by the Iranians in the rest of the theaters.
Let's draw our attention to the Iranians. Marshall, you mentioned that the rocket was an Iranian-delivered rocket. Naturally, beyond the thermal scanning that included also the location from which this rocket emanated from, the IDF has also assessed the debris and identified the rocket as a Falak 1 rocket, an unguided rocket that struck Majd al-Shams. And if we look really at the broad spectrum of Iranian activities right now throughout the region, one of the maneuvers conducted by the RGC Quds Force in collaboration with Liwa Fatimiyun as well as the Liwa Zainabiyun brigades in the Al-Mayadin and Al-Bukamal area are preparing for some sort of exercise, or have been exercising and are now expanding that exercise to broader scopes in order to not only signal Israel that they would join the fight in the event that an all-out war breaks out between Hezbollah and Israel, but is also signaling the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan that it may face the brunt of such an attack, something that, of course, also Hashd al-Sha'bi, or the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, may join in the event that the Iranians see this as a win-win situation, considering that it is not faced with any cost of its various belligerent activities throughout this region.
Yeah, well, let me just reiterate what I just said, which is time is not on Israel's side, both at the tactical or the strategic level. Now, I want to come back to something that Mike said regarding Tony Blinken. I wish Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan would stop speaking in compound sentences. How about just say, we support Israel's right to defend itself? No buts, no caveats, no conditions. How about giving full-throated support to our ally who's just had 12 children murdered by an Iranian-furnished ballistic missile? We know where that missile was produced, by the way. We know the exact Iranian facilities and fabrication sites, and keep that in mind in the coming days, because Iran is as culpable for this murderous activity by its proxy as Hezbollah itself. The Iranians do pose it's not a two-front war that the state of Israel faces. Israel faces an omnidirectional threat from these Iranian proxies. And I am greatly, the next administration, the next Trump administration, when they come to office, is going to face exactly the same situation we faced when we took office in 2017. We faced an Iran that was flush with cash from Obama's JCPOA deal. We faced an Iran whose Quds Force was completely off the charts in terms of funneling weapons, money to its terror proxies, embedding advisors with its terror proxies. The Houthi movement really picked up steam back in those 2018, 2019 days. And we had to fight back with all of the tools available to us, including through sanctions, to put the Quds Force back in their box. And that included removal of Soleimani. The next administration is going to face exactly the same situation, but perhaps worse.
Drawing from your remark on the Houthis, General Akwen, I'd like to ask you particularly, we heard Abdel Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansar Allah and the Houthi tribe, coming out and saying that Israel's recent attack against Al-Hudaydah port in response to the strike on Tel Aviv will not go unanswered, pledging to really ratchet up Houthi strikes against maritime shipping, but also Israel in particular. Do you see them joining the fight with Hezbollah in the event of an all-out conflagration?
I think, of course, speaking about maybe we are just jumping between two fronts, it is one holistic front. All of these groups are united to destroy Israel. And the focus in Israel is a huge motivation for them to be united. And all of them are playing a double game. They are just making an excellent exploitation of the engagement between Israel and Hamas, that giving in the public opinion support that it is an engagement about Israeli-Palestinian conflict that yet is unresolved, and it is a conflict that in public opinion in United States, Europe, really getting empathy to the Palestinian side. On the other side, it is just an exploitation because they are managing another campaign. It means that in one campaign, by double meaning, it is just to come to help the Palestinians, but the real campaign is to destroy Israel with troops that coming directly to destroy Israel, not at all really taking care about the Palestinians. And we must also bring all our friends to realize that double game. It is very important to realize that about Hezbollah. They are not at all freedom fighters. They are making an excuse of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and trying to get the branding of that accepted conflict with empathy in the world to do something definitely different, to kill in Majal Shams, to destroy the north side of Israel, not at all connected to the whole narrative of colonialism, etc. We must do everything to bring that realization and that awareness to the world.
Indeed. Well, let's reshift our focus to strategic power competition, since one of the two main goals, if not the main goal, of the Islamic Republic right now, in order to preserve its own regime, is to oust the United States from the Middle East and lay the foundation for both China and Russia to take America's place. So, Mike, when we're talking about this specifically, where's the disconnect between Washington's policymakers right now and reality on the ground?
The Biden administration, the Biden administration is populated by people who served President Obama. To a man, they all believe that the Middle East is best managed through engagement, constructive engagement of Iran. They don't advertise this loudly because it's not popular with the American people, but they're very proud of this policy, and it's central to their understanding of how to deal with the Middle East. They believe that the constructive engagement of Iran will help settle all of the different conflicts in the region. They believe it will keep the United States from having to have a military buildup in the region, and they believe it will actually pull Iran away from Russia and China. I personally don't agree with any of these views, and they don't want to argue them. They don't want to defend these views publicly because most people, I think, at least most people in Congress, are going to agree with people like me on this. But it's very important to understand that this is their worldview, and they're proud of it. They believe that they have an alternative understanding of the region that is superior to the vision of the Trump administration, which believed that maximum pressure was the best way to moderate the Iranians.
I call it progressive adventurism, hoping to create something that is just not compatible with this region, unfortunately. But
if I could just say one more sentence on this, just think about Amos Hochstein, who's the President Biden's right-hand man on Lebanon. What is his answer to the threat to Israel that General Hacohen just described? His answer is, we should do a deal. The United States should broker a deal between Israel and Lebanon, where Israel retreats from some territory in the north. In return for that, Hezbollah will move its shock forces north of the Litani. And in addition, the United States will stream tens of millions, maybe even more, of dollars into southern Lebanon to develop Lebanon. In other words, it will build up Lebanon. It will build up Hezbollah economically. That is, he's on record publicly saying this. They believe there's a win-win where we go to the Iranians and we tell them we will make your proxy richer and we will make Lebanon more prosperous if you just will moderate the conflict with Israel.
Well, Hezbollah is practically a cartel terrorist organization which is providing protection, or the current administration is buying protection for the state of Israel from such a blatant organization. But we don't have very much time left, and in one sentence from each of you, what should we focus on for the next week? And are we expected to see an all-out conflagration? Marshall, we'll start with you.
Look, I think Mike has it correct when he talks about the worldview of the Obama, Biden, Harris people. But what they fail to grasp is when we're talking about the Ayatollah or we're talking about Ismail Ghani, we're talking about theocratic revolutionaries who go to bed at night and wake up in the morning plotting on how to spread the Islamic revolution across the region. They do not think in the same way that Western democracies think, and they don't operate in the same way. And so the failure to grasp that fundamental issue is what leads to such erroneous policy decisions as we've seen. Now, I don't think we're going to see a wider conflagration because Israel well understands that the arsenal that Hezbollah has been given by the Iranians could saturate and quickly overwhelm the missile defense systems that they have. And if they're precluded by the Bidenists from actually striking those underground storage sites, which are down in central Beirut, among other places, then they're not going to be able to preemptively eliminate that major threat to the cities across Israel. So I believe we'll see something surgical, but hopefully it will be, as I said at the outset, something violently executed now, not perfectly executed next week.
General Quinn?
I really expect the administration in the United States and, of course, President Biden and everyone in the White House to open eyes. Now they are blind to the huge involvement of Russians and Chinese in everything happened here, in the way they are supporting the whole Iranian campaign. They are supporting that in direct support. And the main struggle here is about the domination of the region between the bloc, China and Russia, with Iran against the United States. And Israel is in between, and we must open eyes to that.
Mike?
I totally agree with what both Marshall and Gershon said. I see it exactly the same way. Israel's in a very tight spot here. They have to do something very significant, but not so significant that, as Marshall said, they're overwhelmed by the arsenal of Hezbollah. I'm going to be watching to see what they do. Maybe I wonder if they can come up with something that will have the shock and awe factor that Gershon mentioned. But I myself can't imagine what that would be. We're going to have to wait and see.
Dr. Duran, Mr. Billingsley, and General Cohen, I'd like to thank all three of you for your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day.